Hello, everybody. How are we doing?
Good.
Oh, that was... Oh, gosh. Okay, let's try that again. How is everybody doing?
Great.
Oh, okay, great. That's what I want to hear. Well, welcome aboard the RMS Queen Mary. I will be your tour guide, Christina. This is my lovely assistant, Phil. From 1840 until the late 20th century, Cunard had an agreement with the British government to haul mail back and forth from Europe to North America. This is why she was called the RMS Queen Mary. RMS stands for Royal Mail Ship. She was launched in 1934. Her maiden voyage was May 27th, 1936. She was then drafted. So this is now what we call the Mauritanian room. It was originally the tourist class main lounge or garden lounge or wicker lounge. It was called wicker lounge because it had a lot of wicker furniture. So in 1989, two women from property services entered this room and they noticed a young woman in 1940 style clothing sitting at the center of the dance floor. She wasn't in their way, so they just continued setting up for an event they had later that night. A few minutes later, their manager walked in, looked at the young woman, went over to her employees and said, "What is she doing here?" And she said, and the employees said, "Well, she wasn't in our way, so we just went about our business." Manager walks over to the young woman, says, "Excuse me, I'm going to need you to leave the room because we have an event to set up for." Young woman does not acknowledge her in any way. Well, bless you. The manager then says, "I'm going to call security to have you escorted out of this room if you do not leave." The young woman still does not acknowledge. As the manager goes to pick up the phone, the young woman stands up from her chair. She looks around the room. She even smiles, and then she slowly disappears along with her chair. The three employees stated that they all saw this young woman, and they said that the apparition lasted about 10 minutes, which is our longest recorded sighting here on the ship. Now you can take this time, walk around, gather over here for me. I don't want to shout too loud. So every once in a while, or actually, I'm pretty sure a few of you are wondering if we knew who this young woman was or how she died. We don't know who she was. We don't actually believe she did die. What I was describing in here is what's known as a residual haunting. So what you see in Hollywood is called a conscious haunting. It's where a spirit of the dead is clearly messing with someone of the living. And a residual haunting is that we're all made up of energy. And as we walk around, we leave that energy behind, kind of like a footprint. So at one point, there was a young woman hanging out in here. And I keep hearing things. At one point, there was a young woman hanging out in here, probably having a good time. The Queen Mary then recorded that, and she plays it on a loop, kind of like she's showing us her memories. Oh, wow. Isn't that cool? I think that's pretty fascinating. If everybody could please follow me down this corridor. Starboard hallway, the starboard hallway, is Suite M119. It's also known as the Winston Churchill Suite. If you don't know who Winston Churchill was, he was the Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War II. He used this room and the rooms around it as his mobile war office. He sailed a handful of times on board, 3 times during the war, 3 times after. A few years ago, we had a housekeeper walking down this corridor, and she started smelling a very strong odor of smoke as soon as she reached M119. She knocked on the door, no one answered, so she let herself in. She noticed that there was a portly man sitting in a chair smoking a cigar, and she explained to him, "There is no smoking on board." And he stood up. He was very annoyed. He turned around and he disappeared into the portrait that is of Winston Churchill. Another fun fact about Winston Churchill, he was known to love smoking cigars. Please watch your step as we make our way downstairs. I don't fall now. We're standing in the main hotel lobby for our hotel, and she's a hotel again. And originally that was the purser's desk. It was for the stewards, like a reception area. And over here at the starboard lounge was the first class doctor's office. Now, over the years, we have had many sightings of the lady in white. She is usually seen in empty ballrooms or accompanied with music. There seems to be a connection to this piano here. Now this piano is original to the ship. It was originally located in the tourist class main lounge where we just were. And it has had many homes on board. Now after World War II, 22,000 war brides were brought from England to North America to be reunited with their GI husbands. Now, they had to be claimed by their husbands as soon as they arrived in the States, or else they risked being returned back to England. Our theory is that the lady in white is a bride that was never claimed. It's pretty sad, right? Feel free to take a look in the starboard lounge. You can look out at the beautiful, picturesque scene of downtown Long Beach. If you're a fan of Dexter or CSI Miami, downtown Miami. And take some photos and then meet me back over here. The only thing I ask, please don't play the piano, sit on the bench. They're very old. Yeah, so this is original. People would put their cigarettes out. There used to be like a hole. So we had a female housekeeper enter into this women's restroom right here. And she saw a gentleman dressed in a officer's uniform. She thought that was strange, but to the gentleman's defense, this used to be the men's room. She was really surprised when she saw him. She was shocked when he disappeared. Now in 1949, Senior Second Officer William Stark was coming off duty from the bridge. He was invited by the staff captain to have a pre-dinner cocktail with him and a few other officers. He made his way down to the captain's quarters and he asked the steward if he could have a glass of gin. The steward then handed him a bottle of what he thought contained gin. The Officer Stark had a really long shift, so he poured himself a nice heavy pour and he shot it back. He immediately realized it was not gin, but in fact carbon tetrachloride, which is a powerful cleaning agent. When the other officers arrived, he jokingly told them, "I do believe I've just poisoned myself." He had. The next day, he wasn't feeling well. The following day, when they arrived in Southampton, they took him to the hospital where he died a few days later. We believe that Officer Stark is the officer that is haunting this lady's restroom. He is more frequently seen up in the captain's quarters or simply roaming the halls. Maybe he's still looking for the right drink. Please follow me this way. I know it's overcast, but we are going to be headed outside. If anybody has sunglasses, please feel free to put those on.
Oh yeah.
So nobody else knows the condition.
Darkest stories in Queen Mary's history. The bow was the site of a horrific accident during World War II. Many of you may not know that the Queen Mary was actually one of our main strongholds during World War II. Winston Churchill himself stated that with the help of Queen Mary and her sister ship, the Queen Elizabeth, the war ended actually 1 to 2 years earlier than it would have. Adolf Hitler was so intimidated by the Grey Ghost, she was nicknamed this for her battleship navy gray color at the time and her high speed, that he put up a $250,000 bounty and the Iron Cross with oak leaves to any U-boat captain that could sink either ship. In 1942, the Queen Mary was off the shore of Northern Ireland, and off her starboard bow was one of her escort cruisers, the HMS Curacao. She was making her zigzag maneuver, an invasive zigzag maneuver, and my lovely Bill assistant will take over from here, guys. Thank you.
All right. That was pretty good. Yeah, I'm sorry. She's still in training. She's doing a great job there, Christina. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah. All right, so yes. as actually Christina said, Queen Mary was using a zigzag pattern to avoid torpedoes. Back in the 1940s, there was no such thing as missile lock. If you wanted to fire a torpedo, you line up your shot, hope whatever you're shooting at doesn't move because the torpedo only went one way. So to avoid being sunk, she would change direction every couple of minutes. So off the coast of Northern Ireland, 2:12 in the afternoon, the Curacao drifts in front of the Queen Mary. The Queen Mary cut the Curacao in half. It's just a 4,000-ton cruiser versus an 81,000-ton ocean liner. She didn't have a chance. In less than a minute, both halves were engulfed in flames. 5 minutes after that, the Curacao was lost beneath the Atlantic Ocean. There was nothing anyone on board the Queen Mary could do to help for two reasons. First, the captain was under strict orders not to stop until all of his charges arrived safely at their final destination. And at the time, that was about 10,000 soldiers on board. Far too many lives at stake. The other reason is to come to a complete stop would have taken the Queen Mary 10 miles. There were 101 survivors. They were picked up by other members of the military escort. But now we get reports from our engineering crew or our security staff that late at night, or even if it's just quiet enough, they can hear shouting out here at the bow like something's gone horribly wrong. Parapsychologists believe that is the 338 sailors who went down with the Curacao, reliving the accident over and over again. So the bow is probably the most concentrated area of paranormal energy. Well, folks, if you want to take a few minutes to take some pictures, go ahead, and then we're going to regroup inside at the fire station. Fire station, even the old CO2 canisters. Fire was a very real concern on the ship of Beautiful Woods. There were a lot of safety lessons taken from the Titanic when the Queen Mary was built, and one of the new safety features was an increase in the number of watertight hatches. In fact, the Queen Mary had 38 watertight hatches. These were hydraulically controlled, remotely controlled up in the wheelhouse. So in the event of a hull breach or a fire, these hatches would slam shut with 700 pounds of hydraulic pressure in less than a minute. About 35 seconds for the pressure to build up, 6 seconds for them to slide shut. Working the machine areas could get monotonous. If it was smooth sailing, meaning no real issues to tend to, the engineers pretty much just stood around waiting for their shift to end. So during fire drills, they invented a game called Chicken. While the hatches were getting ready to close, they would jump back and forth through the hatchway to see how many times they could make it through before the hatch started moving. Back in 1966, on a very foggy day in July, just as a precaution, the captain ordered all the hatches closed. A few moments later, some engineers walked down into the aft engine room to discover an 18-year-old fireman had been crushed in hatch 13. They got him out, they took him to the infirmary, but he died shortly thereafter. And we now get reports, apparently it's noon. We now get reports that people see a young man in coveralls who simply fades from view. People have taken photos of hatch 13, they caught kind of a shadowy figure lurking in that area. We've had reports of disembodied whistling. People have come out of the engine rooms with grease marks on their face like someone's touched them. Women will complain they felt somebody pull their hair. There's a theory why the engineer will specifically target women. In the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, women were not allowed in machine areas on a ship. You did not go into the engine room, and you definitely didn't go in the boiler rooms. So the engineer's pulling your hair to say, hey, you don't belong here, get out. Nobody knows for sure how he got caught in the hatch, because he was down there by himself. There are those who believe he was playing chicken. But there are others who think he was just coming back for a tool that he had dropped, and he misjudged the timing of the door. Because we also get reports of people hearing him whisper, have you seen my wrench? Now folks, if you want to take some photos of the hatch, if you want to pose with the hatch, go right ahead, and then join me back inside. So the Queen Mary did not have a steerage class. No one would be sleeping in the boiler rooms with the luggage or anything silly like that. There was only first cabin and tourist class. The way they broke up this ship was not by deck, it was by the smoothness of the ride. First class was the center of the ship because that was the smoothest ride. Cabin class was the stern, the back of the ship. They had to deal with engine vibrations. Tourist class, the bow, the forward end, by far the roughest ride as the Queen Mary bounced across the waves. So our tour class staircases had two major design flaws. They are at a really high angle and they're facing towards the bow. That became a problem when the Queen Mary hit rough water and started to climb a large wave, because then the angle of the stairs goes from 45 to 90 degrees. There are a number of documented cases of tourist class passengers being tossed off of this staircase. And there's one report from the 1950s of a gentleman found collapsed on the staircase. Now, we don't know if he fell back and hit his head or if he died of a heart attack or whatever. Unfortunately, a lot of our records are unclear, just because unless the doctor on board could immediately confirm the cause of death, they wouldn't find out until they arrived in port and confirmed that later in the hospitals. That's why a lot of you'll hear just like cause of death unknown, because we just don't have the records. But we do have the man in black. This is a shadowy figure that will ascend the staircase, turn the corner, and then just disappear. Right this way. Other than looking like a scene out of The Shining, what I'm about to tell you has nothing to do with ghosts. You may notice that you cannot see the end of A deck. You may also notice that we're walking slightly downhill. That is on purpose. The Queen Mary was built sheer to deck. When she was being constructed, all of the decks were bent to match the banana shape of the hull to increase the strength and flexibility of her frame. As she would crash into the 50-foot waves of the Atlantic Ocean, the shock would travel through her frame and she would bend and flex, but she would never break. I'd also like to direct your attention to these Bakelite handrails. Bakelite being one of the earliest forms of plastic. When the Queen Mary was first being constructed, the arrogance of man won out. They decided they had made the ship so big she would have no trouble with the waves of the Atlantic Ocean, and initially she was built without handrails. At the end of their first winter storm in October of 1936, there were a dozen ambulances waiting in New York City to pick up the severely injured passengers. After that, they installed 20 miles of brand new Bakelite handrails. So when she did inevitably pitch and roll, you just hold on for dear life. I told you that story to tell you this story. In 2001, there was a family exploring the ship. They're walking down the hall, but they couldn't shake the feeling that somebody was following them. They finally just stopped moving to kind of feel it out, what was going on. The grandmother shrieked and almost fell over. She said that she saw a woman float past her and dissolve through the wall. Those two stories are not necessarily related, because there's a theory. You don't have to die someplace to haunt it. Parapsychologists believe that instead of ascending to a higher plane of existence, some spirits may choose to return to an area where they had some of their fondest memories. So the woman who disappeared through the wall may not have been a casualty of the storm, but a happy ghost returning to her old stateroom. Right this way. If you have ever watched any of the ghost hunter type shows that have featured the Queen Mary, you may have already heard about room B340, which is supposed to be the most haunted room on the ship. It's at the front of B deck. It is not marked in any way, because as soon as the ghost shows made B340 famous, people started breaking into it and stealing things. Their favorite thing to steal was the nameplates that said B340, so we stopped replacing them. The first ghost story about that room came from the 1960s. A passenger woke up in the middle of the night and she claimed that she felt someone repeatedly pulling the sheets off of her. At first, she thought the sheets had just fallen off, so she pulled them back up. They got pulled back down. She pulled them back up, they got pulled back down. A full-on tug-of-war ensued before she remembered she was in the room by herself. She looked up, she saw the silhouette of a man standing at the foot of her bed. She screamed, the man disappeared. Her scream got the full attention of the steward, who ran up the hall into her room. And once she calmed down enough to explain what had happened, the steward explained that when he passed her room, he didn't see anybody go in, and he didn't pass anyone in the hall on his way back. He jumped forward to the 1980s when the whole space was a standard hotel room. A housekeeper went in to change the linens. She stepped out to get some towels for the bathroom. When she went back in, she found the sheets on the bed that she had just made in a pile in the middle of the floor. Don't know what this ghost's issue is with sheets, but that seems to be his thing. Now, all of the activity in B340 is attributed to a death reported in the 1950s. Everyone had already disembarked. The staff captain was doing his rounds. He discovered the passenger had passed away in his bed. Cause of death unknown. Whoever this gentleman was, we just call him Walter. He's the ghost that's believed to haunt B340. Now, the room was discontinued for renting because of the constant complaints from hotel guests. They would wake up to see the lights in the bathroom turning on and off by themselves. Guests would leave the room, come back, and all the water fixtures would be running, or they would hear a knock at the door, open it, and of course, there's nobody there. So finally, the hotel said, enough, and they shut it down. There was talk for many years after that of restoring B340 and renting it out as the haunted room, which is what we eventually did. It was remodeled into a mini suite, and it went for about $1,000 a night. Believe it or not, people did pay that price tag. The first night it was open, the people staying there kept calling the front desk saying, okay, we get it, you can turn off the special effects, and the front desk attendant had to keep telling them, we don't have special effects. They left abruptly at 2 o'clock in the morning. Guess they had a good time. And right the night before that, of course, we have to do the final room check. So right when it opened, it didn't have a key card yet. It just had one hard master key. So the housekeeper had gone down to get the final cleaning done. Had to call security to bring the key down. While she was waiting for security, she insists that the door opened by itself because the security guard arrived and said, oh, you've already got the door open. She said, yes, you're gonna stay here while I clean this room. Watch your step coming down. I do have one more crew encounter to share with you. The Queen Mary was the height of technology when she first set sail. These elevators are original. The controls have been updated, but other than that, they're original. They were all built, exactly the same way. All the parts are interchangeable. The only reason we have 2 that work is because we keep taking parts from all of the other original elevators. A number of years ago, one of my former crewmates, Sabria, was wrapping up her day, wasn't really paying attention. She had her hands filled with paperwork. She ran into the elevator, she pressed the button to whatever deck she was going to, the doors closed. The interior doors are very reflective. She said as soon as they shut, she saw the reflection of a lady in a blue dress standing behind her. When she turned around to say, I'm sorry, I didn't realize there was somebody else in here. There wasn't anybody else in there. The doors opened and she felt a breeze blow out past her. Last time, watch your step. Very nice photograph of the first class swimming pool before the maiden voyage. This was actually taken during the speed trials. Originally, there were 2 diving boards, one on either side of the slide. Those were taken out within the first 3 months of the Queen Mary's service when they discovered that if you try to use a diving board on a moving ship, you may not come down where you think you're coming down. Now, the ceiling was made of quartz, and the Queen Mary, of course, is a ship on water. Apparently, quartz and water are both really good conductors of paranormal energy. So, directly below me in the old changing rooms, we now have a vortex. This is a whirlpool of energy that allows the spirits to travel from the other side back into the land of the living. This is why parapsychologists believe there's so much paranormal activity on board the ship to this very day. This was the original entrance to the first class swimming pool. We have not been able to use it as a pool since the ship came to Long Beach. California State Code dictates pools cannot be deeper than 3.5 feet at the shallow end. The first and cabin class pools were both 6 feet at the shallow end. Wow. The cabin class pool was removed and turned into the Royal Theater. The first class pool became a centerpiece for all of our ghost-related material. That is not water in the pool. It is a ripple projector intended to make it look creepy. The first class pool ended up doubling as the tourist class pool from the late 1950s until the end of the Queen Mary's run. For the longest time, tourist class passengers didn't have anywhere to swim, so after years of complaints, the Cunard Line decided to make a concession. While the first class passengers were at tea, they would allow the tourist class passengers to use the first class pool. The moment they were done, the pool was drained, cleaned, and refilled for the first class passengers. The 24,000 gallon capacity could be drained or filled in about 25 minutes. It was salt water pumped in from the Atlantic, which you would think would be freezing. But you have to consider the location of the pool. It is sitting directly above the boiler rooms. The boiler rooms can get up to 115 degrees, so the water was actually very pleasant. Probably our most infamous spirit is believed to haunt the first class pool. A little girl that everyone refers to as Jackie. Somewhere around 7 years old, she's always described as a little girl in a sailor dress with blonde hair that a lot of people think was a cabin class passenger who drowned in the cabin class pool. The thinking is when that pool was converted to the theater, she upgraded herself to the first class pool. People used to tell us they would see Jackie popping her head around the columns or up over the railings, like she's playing peekaboo or hide and seek with the guests. We had a few reports, people claiming they felt a cold little hand take hold of theirs. But the most consistent and frequent report that we would get anywhere on the ship was the sound of a little girl singing in this area. She's a very playful spirit. Not sure if you noticed the gigantic dome at the back of our property, but that was built specifically to house the Spruce Goose, Howard Hughes' big wooden plane. That left in 1993, was taken to an Air and Space Museum in Oregon. For a while, it was just a big empty dome. It did get used as a sound stage a few times. Batman and Robin with George Clooney, I guess that was the Batcave. And Pirates of the Caribbean, every time they went to Tortuga, that was Tortuga. It's now been taken over by Carnival, that's their cruise check-in. Right before the Spruce Goose left, we had a report from a security guard who said he was doing his midnight rounds. He entered the hangar and he saw a little girl in a sailor dress walking along the wing. When he yelled up to her, "Kid, what are you doing?" she jumped off the wing and vanished. So Jackie is not only our most popular, but apparently our most powerful spirit, because she is the only one who's been spotted off the ship. All right, folks, if you want to take a peek, you want to take a picture, go ahead and then join me over at the open doors. We would still get fairly regular reports from hotel guests and crew that they had paranormal experiences on board. In fact, before we got shut down, I don't think a month went by where I didn't have hotel guests tell me there were shadow people in the room. They woke up to the doors and dresser drawers opening and closing by themselves, or they hear unintelligible whispers in the middle of the night. All kinds of fun stuff you want to have happen when you're trying to sleep. Back in 2017, one of our security guards, Gary, was running around telling anyone who would listen he had just had his very first paranormal experience in the decade that he had worked here. He said he was doing his morning rounds. He was walking through one of the kitchens when this big cart of trays rolled out in front of him. And at first he wanted to yell, "Hey, that is not safe," but there was nobody else in the kitchen. The cart turned to the left, continued to roll uphill, it made a right and a left around a corner and came to a stop on its own. Believe it or not, folks, I'm not here to convince you that the ship is haunted. I'd let you in your own mind. Excuse me. All right, folks, so we are now on our deck. To get back up to Promenade Deck, if you head over to Midship Marketplace, you want to head out onto the gun deck or check out the ship models, or if you have another tour, or take these outside elevators up to level 4 to get down to the wharf level. If you're going to the parking lot or you need a restroom break, take that down to level 1. If you have questions, hang out. We can talk to you for a little bit. That's fine. Other than that, folks, if you enjoyed our time together, I'm Bill. This is Christina. You hated this tour. I'm Desi. That's Lucy. Thank you for coming. Have a wonderful afternoon, folks.